Move on to item E1. So this is the code rewrite item. We said at the last meeting that we had the council direction, staff had council direction. We saw the memo from the city manager. I was able to invite Mr. Lloyd kind of at the last minute. Thank you for honoring that request. We'll probably call on you when we need to. So the goal is it's sort of a very short timeline that council's imposed, and so we want to see how we can be most effective for the city and then also for staff, so we're not kind of spinning our wheels where it's not productive. Does anyone have thoughts on how we should move forward? What kinds of working groups? How often we meet? What kind of items we should tackle? Commissioner Kinney?
Just start things off. I had an interesting conversation with somebody the other day that noted how council treats things at first, second, and third readings, and that sometimes they will pass, I don't know if you would call it amendments or resolutions, giving staff much broader stroke recommendations under first or second reading. And by the time they get to third reading, they're actually producing red line amendments. It's very interesting that council has given a lot of the broad strokes already. The other thing that's very interesting is that their capacity target is well above the draft 3 capacity. Don't hold me to these numbers, but I believe that the draft 3 capacity was 200 something thousand units, that the mapping working group kind of all-in scenario was about 500 something thousand, and the staff target or the council target's about 400 something thousand. So there is still substantial work to be done to hit that staff target, as well as the strategic housing blueprint items. With that in mind, I was thinking, is there something we can do earlier to maybe give further granular direction within the council guidance, and then maybe establish some working groups to continue that conversation with staff and stakeholders? But because maybe we've taken some top line votes at the outset, you don't have to worry like, oh, this person's on that working group. Are they going to hijack it and give this? No, we set the broad picture already. So just to kick things off.
Commissioner Shaw?
A couple of my observations were, number one, and I sent out a list. I kind of listed all the things that council kind of ask of staff between now and when they hear this in October. And it's quite a list of things from testing, modeling, other information for things that I think we should have in our possession as well to be able to make good recommendations. And so I think we need to look at that and kind of think through how we're going to work with staff to try to get that information. I'm sure they're already aware of it and know that it's quite a laundry list of information and tasking. And I don't know if they're doing it with in-house staff or need consultant help, but there is quite a bit of work. So it would be good for us to look at that, because that is the data and some of the input we'll need to make our recommendations. Secondly, there was, I believe, council might help me with this, Andrew, a direction to take PC recommendations that were approved previously, or does anybody recall that direction?
Something like consider the recommendations.
Okay.
So not necessarily accept, but consider, yeah.
So we have new PC members here that we probably need to share that and become familiar with those, because we could, given that there were some motions in there that were passed by a majority, if we could get consensus on those, we could knock out quite a bit, easily by just looking through those. Anyway, those are it for now.
Commissioner Shea?
So I get Commissioner Shaw, I agree about the consensus, right? And I think it depends, council ticket is like different votes, right? Percentage. Is consensus meaning everybody, or vice versa, or majority, supermajority? So that's something that we got to figure out, maybe to set direction. But something that we had asked for And I think a lot of the public had asked for is also some visualization of what all this stuff means. And right now, I don't even know what consultants are on, right? I mean, there were consultants that helped us with capacity. The capacity now is even different. It's a different number than what we were looking at as all in, or even what we were trying to hope for. Who's going to help us, like turn those levers and help visualize that for us? And I know Commissioner McGraw had looked into a couple, I think she sent it to all of us, of some programs that are out there right now to plan that other cities have used, some software to help visualize what all of this stuff means, especially along the corridors where we're going to place it. It'd be great for us as well as for the public and staff to be able to use these tools. And do we even know where that is? I mean, is staff considering it? I mean, I think it would be great for Planning Commission to make that recommendation to council that we get that. And whether it's that program or it's a different program, but everybody understands the intent of what we're trying to do with these visualization tools.
So Commissioner Shea, you spoke of levers. We had a working group that was looking at levers and ratcheting some and not others. The extreme scenario C it was called, and this was shared a while ago to all of the commissioners, was maximize income restricted affordable housing. All the levers were ratcheted up, and the housing capacity was 479,000. And in council direction is what, over 400? 405, 410. And this generated about 18,000 affordable units. So just to give commissioners and staff a sense of what the most extreme ratcheting of the levers generated was around that number. So it's going to be, a good bit away from draft 3, because these were levers that we had applied on top of draft 3.
I do want to note that even that extreme scenario left the vast majority of the single-family housing in Austin zoned pretty much as is.
That's correct. Any other thoughts, Commissioner Azar?
I was just going to say, I think building on what Commissioner Shaw and Kenny had said, I agree. As a new commissioner, I would love to get some sort of a presentation or some document that gives me good context on where the final votes landed and what did that look like, for me to at least get myself up to speed moving forward. As long as it might be, I'll use my summer to go through it.
Use a magnifying glass. Those are all like 6-point font, very long Excel file. So if we can have Mr. Lloyd come up, and maybe Mr. Lloyd, if you could add some color to the memo we got from the city manager's office, what we can do to stay out of your way, but also be productive.
Sure. Can you advise on if any consultants have been added since Mr. Cronk wrote the memo?
Brent Lloyd, Development Officer from DSD, and I'll get to that in a moment. But I just, by way of introduction, the team that Manager Cronk assembled, which you all have seen in the memo, are hard at work developing draft work plans for implementing all of the items in Council's direction that they provided on May 2nd. And that will include all of the specific areas that Council touched upon, everything from TDM to transition areas to missing middle housing, parking, the whole gambit. And it will also include some general improvements and edits to the document consistent with Council's kind of broader direction for a simpler, easier to use code. Part of that work plan will also include a proposed timeline for commission and council hearings, which we will provide to you for input before finalizing. We're not gonna bust out with a hearing date for you guys without getting your input on that first. But we're working through all the various scenarios to come up with appropriate and workable dates. During the code development process, it's going to be very important that staff be able to focus primarily on getting the work done. Preparing, as I'm sure all of you can appreciate, preparing a whole land development code with map and text and tracking all of the changes that are being made in response to Council's direction, it's a huge feat. So there will be a period of time going forward, where our ability to attend public meetings and to sort of engage with you all is going to be limited. But you guys are a critical part of the LDC revision process, and you play a fundamental legal role in that process. And so we understand you're wanting to stay abreast of developments as they arise. And so to that end, if you all in the coming weeks and months have questions, we encourage you to forward those to your liaison, Andrew, and he will then get with corporate public information who will work with the leadership team to provide you all with answers to those questions. We're also, corporate PIO is working on a portal of some kind that will be sort of a uniform place where questions can be posted and answers provided so that everyone can see them. But until that's finalized, I would suggest just forwarding your questions to Andrew. To get to your more specific questions, we are looking at consultant support. We're very aware of the need for modeling, and we have some of that capacity in-house. But we will certainly be apprising you when decisions are made about potential consultant support and potentially enhanced models that would be used to generate capacity estimates.
Brent, could you describe sort of the staff morale after kind of getting clear direction from council? Is it, excitement, or is it we got marching orders and you can? I mean, is it sufficient direction?
Yes, the direction is, and you all have seen it, it's 19 pages, and it's very detailed and focused, and we've read it and studied it and are, making plans to implement all the different provisions of that direction. And I think staff are very committed and excited about the process for moving forward, and we're committed to preparing a solid code and to carefully documenting kind of all the decisions that are made in terms of how we're going to implement council's direction. It's definitely it's a little bit of an intimidating task for sure, but we're committed to doing it. And I think the leadership team and the core team are hopeful and excited and committed to delivering a solid product.
And those, sorry if it was an awkward question. It was sort of a leading question to how can we help? We were originally thinking about working groups and maybe staffing some of those working groups. And it sounded from your introduction that maybe that was a little challenging because you have this monumental task in front of you.
I think that last comment is fair. We definitely, as I mentioned, are going to need a period of time where a lot of staff resources are going to have to be spent in mapping and drafting and considering different scenarios and running options. And I think a lot of that very focused work would be undermined by attending a lot of different public meetings. However, again, we understand that you all want to stay abreast of things, and you all can certainly post items to discuss the code rewrite. And again, you can forward questions to Andrew as well. The public process going forward, when that is announced, I think it will certainly include some kind of a period between when the code is released and when there are formal public hearings that begin. And I think during that period, staff will have more bandwidth to engage. But I think for now, in general, the process that I outlined, forwarding questions to Andrew, who will work through CPIO, and the leadership team, that is the process that we would suggest you follow.
The clear direction from council towards simplification. Could you comment on the original code that we have today is organized in a certain way, and the draft 3 is organized similarly, sort of siloed in departments, zoning and watershed and drainage and so on. Toward achieving simplification, has there been any thought about organizing it differently?
I think that given the time available, that there probably will be some overall structural similarities to what you saw in draft 3, but I think certainly there can be some tightening up, some better use of cross-referencing to reduce page count. And I think there's just a lot of areas where the code can be made more clear. But I think there probably will continue to be some visual separation from zoning and watershed regulations. I think that the work that would be required to totally create an integrated document in the manner that you're suggesting would be challenging given the time available. And also there are just some fundamentally different considerations that go into a set of zoning regulations versus watershed regulations. And I think it would present some real challenges to try to just lump all those together. But staff are actively looking at ways to make the code more usable, to simplify it, and we'll do the best we can on that.
Fair enough. Commissioners, any other thoughts? It's going to be challenging to kind of define our role in the next couple months without getting in staff's way and slowing them down. Commissioner Seeger?
Along the lines of simplification, is there going to be an effort to reduce the redundancy that we saw in Code Next?
Yes, I mean there's definitely an effort to reduce page count, to reduce repetition for sure. There are instances when you really get into the gears and levers of how codes are drafted. There are instances where repeating oneself in the code makes the code more usable for the reader that's just looking at one section of the code and doesn't want to have to scroll back 50 or 100 pages to another section. There's some benefits in terms of usability to a little bit of repetition, but I think those are certainly structural considerations that we're looking at, and we definitely hear the direction from council as well as from you all, from the Planning Commission in response to Draft 3, that you'd like a code that's simpler and has less repetition.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Commissioner Shaw, then Anderson.
What I really liked what council did is, and I have a question, is they really made it very specific, and we looked at some of the things early on in our process that they ended up kind of the 5 lots in. So I think there's some good information to share among the new commissioners. I know it was a very late nights, and we had a lot of compromises in how that rolled out, but there was a lot of good information, good work there. So I think one thing we could commit to is to share that and everybody review that over the next few weeks. And then second, the question is, in the new code, there's very specific targets on housing and where the housing's going to be. So the goal, if staff is to meet those housing targets with the applied changes in zoning along corridors and the such. Is that going to be the goal?
I think in general that's going to be a key consideration, but council's direction, it all has to work together as a whole. So I think if you carefully read all the different items in their direction document, the goal will be to achieve those capacity targets while also abiding by the other direction. So I think there's going to be competing considerations that have to be balanced, and I would hesitate to say that the housing capacity target cannot be looked at in isolation of the rest of council's direction.
Okay.
Commissioner Anderson.
Mr. Lloyd, thank you for being here tonight. We're all really excited. We are 18 days away from the 7th anniversary of Imagine Austin, so it's a long time coming. I know that there's some folks out there kind of upset about how much money has been spent in the past, and I would hope that that is in no way a handicap for you all to spend all the appropriate money we need to get a great land development code. I just feel that our current land development code costs us tens of millions upon tens of millions more than anything we could possibly spend to get a good, decent land development code. I'm a little bit concerned about something that maybe you could walk me through, or maybe this is more staff, but I checked in on an item that we passed here at this body back April 23rd, item D3, that was initiating, it was from a staff memo. NHCD had done a lot of work to come up with potential options of getting a lot more yield out of our density bonuses for TODs, for VMU, and I found out yesterday that, well, that's just also going to be wrapped into Code Next, or whatever we're going to call this, I'm sorry, the rewrite of our land development code. for around 7 years, I've been hearing things like that, like, oh, that's just going to be punted into this. And I wonder, like, do we still have a staff out to do the work of this body, to give things to City Council for consideration, to achieve a lot more density bonus units? I know we had a really great thing come out of here for UNO that I understand is being worked on, but kind of where are we with that? And kind of is everything, I would just hate for everything to suddenly be lumped into this thing. And meanwhile, we're working under our broken but possibly better land development code if we can just get some better tweaks to it.
Commissioner Anderson, I cannot speak for neighborhood housing, and they were unable to be here tonight. Both Erica Leak and Lauren Avioli, I think, are at an event. But we hear you, and we understand that that was an item that the commission initiated. I think there are challenges when staff are working on completely revising the land development code to also parallel to that be working on fairly extensive amendments to current code. That is just, those are two tracks that are hard to run concurrently. And I think, there have been amendments that are fairly narrowly drawn and isolated that staff has tried to pursue even while a code rewrite process has been going on. But I think that pursuing a complete overhaul of the density bonus program, which I think it's widely shared that is a laudable goal and that needs to be done. But working on that as both an amendment to current Title 25 while staff are also working on implementing council's direction through the code rewrite, I think that would be a challenge, if not impossible. So I think that the best that staff can do at this point is to ensure you all that your initiation will be factored into the code rewrite process.
So I guess if this body were more interested in some things in that memo than others, perhaps we can talk to you offline to see about maybe bringing a couple of those items forward so it's not so extensive for staff.
I'm not following your.
So if there were just a couple of those things in that memo that might really make an impact for the developments that are trying to get off the ground, that are VMU, that are TOD, that don't necessarily want to wait 6-8 months for you all to finish your work, that we're not even sure we'll include those items because a lot of those items were F-25 last time. I guess this is just a conversation for us to have with NHCD and understand what we can do. That
I think that you all have you all and the council are the two bodies that have the authority to initiate code amendments, and so you can certainly consider further initiations of code amendments. I think if you choose to consider such an item, we would want to dialogue with you about how realistic that is. In terms of being able to process that amendment while also doing the code amendment or the code rewrite. Certainly, though, the more narrowly drawn an amendment is, the more focused and targeted it is, the more workable it is to bring it forward parallel to working on the code rewrite.
Thank you.
Commissioner Shea?
So on the code rewrite, where does this fit in as far as the East Riverside corridor plan? I mean, we're basically not, in this process, we're not going to be touching like some of these small, corridor plans or small area plans. Is that correct?
We're looking at some minor changes, but not a wholesale rewrite of those codes. Mm-hmm. I think going forward, and this has been something that's been talked about and considered, is for future regulating plans or small area plans, we think there are simpler ways to do it. And when there's if council ultimately adopts a new code that has a wider range of zoning districts to utilize, I think there probably, when we look at those small area plans, there are ways that they could be drafted in a simpler manner so that it's easier to navigate, easier to use. But I think that there's probably going to be limited time available to make those sorts of changes. So I think to your question, those plans will be left largely intact. If there are any changes, they will be very limited and focused.
Okay, so what about, like, for instance, the North Lamar, there was a small area plan that was scheduled to start, and that's been, and also South Pleasant Valley, my understanding is that's been pulled off the table and it's been refocused on, for instance, like South Congress. So we have that process going, and now we have code, the new code that's going, and they're both wanting to somehow interface at a certain point. How is that going to be done? Because they're both kind of concurrently. One's wanting to hear from the other because there's a stakeholder process. The other one doesn't, is basically, again, I mean, staff is doing quite a bit of work on its own, but how are you going to work together to help develop, for instance, what's on this corridor if they're simultaneous? I don't know. I mean, what's the process? Have you talked with small area plan department on how that's going to work?
Well, I mean, we've definitely had some conversations, and they're very much, aware of what's going on and have been involved in some of the team meetings, but I cannot speak specifically to that. I think that if that's a question that you want to forward on, we can try to get you a more specific answer. But I think there's a lot of work that goes into small area planning that is going to have to be done regardless of the outcome of the code rewrite. So I think that although there probably is some, redundancy, I think there's a lot of valuable planning effort that can be undertaken sort of while the code rewrite process is going forward.
Right. Basically, I don't want you to end up here and they're over. Sorry, you're over here and they're over there. It would be great if along the way you guys kind of help each other through. Otherwise, we're going to have to redo this again. When we try to get the small area plan approved. So, yeah.
Commissioner Kenny?
I think everybody is on the same page as the chair in terms of how do we help this process and not hurt it. And I think everyone is hearing you loud and clear and saying we have a mountain of work to get done. Please don't bother us in ways that are unproductive. What I'm wondering is what are the ways that we can bother you that are productive? I think that it's somewhat credible to think that part of the reason why council decided to scuttle the effort last year was that the Planning Commission identified a whole slew of issues in draft 3, and there were so many, and so many of them were fairly serious in terms of their practical input impact, that there was a realization that draft 3 still needed a lot of work. And draft 3 was a professional project that was ostensibly done, but this commission identified a whole bunch of issues with it. And what I think everyone wants to avoid is draft 3B coming out and this commission once again passing 120 amendments because we have a whole bunch of problems with it. And if there is, and I'm not seeking necessarily an answer tonight, but I wonder if the team can think about ways in which, because even though council did offer 9 pages of direction, there was still a whole lot of open space in there and real questions to me of dramatically different ways that things could get done. And I think a lot of us both want to have some input maybe on how that happens before we get to the final product. And we were promised earlier on in the process that there would be a planning commission version and that would go to council, and it ended up just being a spreadsheet, that was so complex that nobody could even use it. So we want to give meaningful input. We'd like it to be before it's a final product, and we just have some addendums there, and without overinflating our own importance too much, I do think that especially those of us who went through the process gained a lot of familiarity with it and have some are able to make contributions, and so not necessarily asking for an answer right now, but I do hope that there are some ways that we can maybe engage that are productive towards having a staff draft that is a better product instead of just PC amendments to a finished staff draft.
We're definitely, the team is consistent with council's direction. The team is committed to drawing upon Planning Commission recommendations from the draft 3 process and identifying where Planning Commission recommendations were considered and implemented. I think as somebody observed earlier, they probably will not all be incorporated, but I think there are many of the Planning Commission's recommendations that harmonize well with council's direction, and some that are just basic improvements to the document that staff will be implementing. So your prior recommendations are very much remain informative to the process going forward.
I think it may have been a universal sentiment up here that when we were finished that we did a lot of good work, but we were all still aware of a ton of work that needed to be done further. And I guess I'm concerned that that same thing is going to happen again, because, you know, while council direction was maybe changing some of the direction, there was still just work to be done.
Brent, any thoughts on? So I'm very impressed with the questions by city manager and staff and the response. Are there other questions that we could help answer in the meantime? Is there other things that you can think of, or maybe not yet, but we're just like the staff is committed. We're committed to getting a product that's going to work at the end of this exercise. So, any thoughts on that? And you know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but
No, I mean, the team will confer, you know, in response to you all's request for potentially considering further ways for you to be involved in the coming months. But I think at this point, you know, we would suggest that the team focus primarily on the hard, detailed, labor-intensive work of preparing the code, and that you all, you know, by all means, as you have questions, comments, concerns that you'd like a general response to, feel free to forward those to Andrew, and we'll make sure that they're responded to. And again, there will be at some point, hopefully in the near future, a portal that's available for questions to be posted and answers to be shared more widely. But until that process is finalized, I think working through Andrew, who will consult with CPIO and the leadership team, is the way to go.
so again, thank you for coming and speaking to us at the last minute. One final question for me would be, there was direction from council about pulling policy out of the criteria manuals and putting them in the code itself. Is that something that we could help with, or does staff have that? I mean, I don't know the magnitude of how much policy there is in the criteria manuals.
Well, I think we're very aware of that direction, and we're thinking about ways to address it. I think there are places where the criteria manuals are sort of there are requirements that are left to the criteria manuals because the code is perhaps less clear than it could be, and that is certainly an area where improvements to the code will result in the criteria manuals having less policy direction in them. But there are other areas where the code deliberately says, here's a requirement, we want staff, the director, to work out the details through administrative rule, which means criteria manuals. So I think their criteria manuals will continue to play an important role in the development process, but to the greatest extent possible, we read that item in council's direction to mean have code that is clear enough to be implemented, and don't rely on criteria manuals to clarify ambiguous code. So we're definitely going to do our best to follow that direction.
Fair enough.
Quick question and one comment for me. So speaking of the criteria manuals, because I mean that would have been really helpful the first time around, and we kept saying, you know, we kept being told, well, they're working on it. Are we going to get a criteria manual? Are we going to be able to see that? I mean, how far along are you guys on that?
There's going to be, I mean, there was work done on the criteria manuals, and it's my sense that there probably will be a period of time if council adopts the new code where there's still some updates to criteria manuals going on. But we think that, you know, if we find ourselves in that situation, that will be workable and it won't be an extended period of time. But getting the criteria manuals written at the same time the code is being developed presents some challenges given the timelines, and so I think there probably will be a period of time where staff are working to apply the new code concurrent with updating criteria manuals, and we don't think, while that does present some challenges, we don't think that's unworkable.
All right, so it hasn't been worked on since before. It's kind of gone on hold as well, is that right?
I cannot speak for all the departments.
Okay.
I think there probably have been some departments that have continued to pursue updates to their criteria manuals.
And then last thing is just a kind of a quick comment, but as far as you talked about a portal for questions and stuff, I think it'd be really helpful for us as well as for everybody when you put those questions up, maybe to find a way to organize it. Like, for instance, is it a transportation related, what section? And so if somebody wants to ask a question in public, they can kind of sift through and go, oh, this is the part, at least to put it in some type of subset. And this way, we can see comments from any of us or whoever related to a certain section versus having to somebody in staff to do it. I mean, we can just kind of pick what section. So, thanks.
Quick
Commissioner
question. What is the code name for this new LDC rewrite?
You mean the actual name of the
Yeah,
code?
what do you call it? 'Cause
I think it
you're
will
not calling it code next, are you?
No, I think the overall name of the project is the Land Development Code Revision.
Okay.
And I think that LDC revision. And I think the ultimate document is going to remain the Land Development Code.
Okay, so we can call it the LDCR then? Or something else? I mean, when we reference it, because we will be referencing Code Next, Draft 3, and the new one. Make sure we don't get them interchanged or confused.
We've
Commissioner-
shortened, we've tended to refer to Draft 3 as simply Draft 3.
Okay, all right.
Commissioner Azar.
Going back to something Commissioner Anderson was raising regarding that we initiated a code amendment as part of what had come from NACD, from the memo from Rosie Truelove. I think one of the things there was I wouldn't say request, but an understanding that further calibration and modeling was required to assess our density bonus programs across the board. As we're talking about assessing all of our density bonuses across the board as part of this land development code revision, I would hope that staff is given the tools, whether that is included in consultants. I know that was a conversation that came up as well. But staff hopefully gets the tools and the support that they need to be able to do that. One of our biggest conversations has been throughout the previous process and the current process to make sure that our density bonus programs are aligned and allow us to achieve the maximum affordability that we need. So hopefully staff will get the tools and the consultants or any other resources required to address that.
I expect that we will, and as I mentioned earlier, we're in the process of identifying the consultant support that would be most helpful to us and most efficient for us to use. It's not uncommon in a code project like this. I've learned for the number of consultants to decline in the final stages, so we don't expect probably to have the same number of consultants involved, but we certainly expect that modeling and capacity analysis and outside help to those efforts will be required, and we will again keep you all updated as decisions are made on that.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. So, commissioners, this is posted only for discussion. If we want to create working groups, let's put that on. Do we have to identify which ones before the agenda? Okay, so let's try and do that. Let's also have volunteers from the commission that can take up what has happened in the past. So the lever exercise, the amendments, we're going to need to catch up some of the newer commissioners and brush up our own memories. So think about which of you want to volunteer, depending on which working group you were on. Maybe you could report to the commission.
Can I make a quick possible recommendation? If we don't have people in working groups, we can also assign it to whatever, like a smaller plan, codes ordinance, whatever, things like that, to even look at. But I mean, if needed. Let's keep it in the family.
Commissioner Shaw?
So previously, we had working groups that we teamed up with ZAP. And with the short time frame, I'm not sure if we can do that. And secondly, I was a little disheartened because things that we kind of worked through in a joint committee, but when it got here, a lot of us didn't, were catching up and didn't like what came out of those joint committees. So as much as I think there is benefit to working with them, I just don't know if we had the time. And I just, from the previous exercise, I just didn't see a lot of benefit once it came to working with this group. So Is that something on any of these? You mentioned working in some of the joint committees. Are we going to,
Yeah, no,
that
I
would
think
be something to consider.
I think Commissioner Shea mentioned that. I wasn't going to suggest that. We were, let's keep it in the PC family, and let's focus on getting everyone caught up.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry, apologies. Chair Commission Liaison Andrew Vera, those working groups were never formally made.
The working groups were not, but some of the joint committee work. There were no. There was joint working groups that were not formal. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah.
Not between Planning Commission and Zoning and Planning Commission.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we can't close that to people who want to attend either.
They're not official meetings.
Right. They're not, but they
Anyone
could,
can attend.
I mean, anybody can attend.
My understanding of our bylaws and the city rules is that we can appoint working groups that are sub-quorum bodies that then would have a standing item on the agenda, but there is also nothing preventing sub-quorum groups from getting together and working on issues.
That is correct, right. And
So-
people from the public, whether they're from ZAP or any other commission, can also attend. But it's about postings, right? On the working groups, I don't think it has to be posted, but
No.
you do have to, like if somebody asked you, Mr. Rivera, then you got to be able to say, oh, they're meeting at this time in this place. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. Your working groups have to be created by each body.
Okay.
And we also have to keep in mind the quorum issues of your joint committees. So if
But if the group decided to meet in private someplace, I mean, I don't know if that's allowed. I mean,
it is.
it is. Okay.
As long as it's not a quorum.
Anything sub-quorum is
Okay.
fine.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean
So
that
even
a
if it's
sub-quorum
working
group
group.
couldn't meet and notify people and open
Okay.
it up, but it's,
So official working groups don't have to,
There's
I mean.
no
could meet.
rules.
Okay. Just want
Okay,
to
so
clarify.
one last thought. So we had the mapping working group that Commissioner Shaw was on, Commissioner Kenny.
There was a residential working group.
I don't know who else was on the mapping. Oliver Zaragoza White. So of those that are still here, Shaw, myself, and Kenny. Residential working group was
It was me, Seeger, that's here, and then, what was that, McGraw and Burkhart.
okay.
Yeah.
Any
that's
other
still
groups?
somewhat intact, yeah.
There was a kind of an informal joined group with Oliver and some ZAP commissioners that were
Compatibility.
working on compatibility. Anyone else? Any other? Commissioner Azar?
I had a question. The residential working group, what was you charged with? What was the residential working group working with?
So we were going through a lot of the, well, part of it was the categories, even like units on a lot, the definitions, things like that. I mean, there was a lot of things that were added as far as for like front yard, this, you have to have this piece, this and this. I don't know, there was so much that was on it. We were looking at it, comparing also to what current code, the complexity of it, different things like that, and making recommendations from that. Yeah.
We were really looking also at the really high visibility issues, such as ADUs and the whole historic process of adding additional space and front yard swimming pools and fences and kind of some of those things that were kind of nitpicky, but yet it needed to be resolved because that was part of the ambiguous nature of the code rewrite. So
it's
you know,
basically
it was
all
just a
of
mishmash.
everything that currently governs SF and that would have governed everything R.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it kind of
Yeah,
was a
like
mismatch.
residential form, setbacks, heights,
Right.
said
Uses.
uses, and there was a lot of discussion about two-family, duplex.
Oh, I hope we've resolved that.
No, we haven't
I don't
resolved.
think it was.
So volunteers. So volunteers for
So does
reporting
somebody
on the work that the mapping group had done, and then volunteers on reporting the amendments.
I mean, I think that the mapping group would be kind of contingent in as much as we did it. Well, we did a lot of work with Envision Tomorrow and the levers, and it was incredibly useful. But if we
Right.
don't have those tools available to us, I think it would be a different thing, which might be advising on the transitions and maybe how the different corridors are treated, considering what we did with the transit networks. There was a case somebody wanted to talk with me about where it's like airport isn't currently completely a core transit corridor, and their property was a half a block off, and so what is currently core transit corridors versus the transit priority network, and how those transitions might work. That's a real mapping exercise, I think. And then, of course, if we have levers, that's a totally another ballgame, but I'm not sure that we're going to have that.
So Commissioner Shaw mentioned this. So the work we did with the transitions and the 1 block, 2 block, 3 blocks. So council picked up on that and provided clear direction. But like Commissioner Kenny said, there has been a lot of work that's happened since we did some of that work, such as the strategic mobility plan, that could inform some of the work that we did, because we were complaining then about not having those things done. But just in general, how do we get all of the commissioners caught up on what work was done, and then we can go from there?
So I have all the amendments and the backup materials. Mr. Rivera sent them to me. It's a beast. I started to do some sorting work on it, but then I wasn't sure if it was going to be worth it. I'm still not sure about that. So we can send that around. The way to just go through it is that there's a long list of amendments, and some of them are very specific, and then some of them have exhibits attached, and you have to go look through the exhibits. God, we really need to get y'all all copies of Draft 3.
Hard copies?
Yeah, because a lot of the amendments reference like specific pages and textual changes.
Could
I know
we all
my
get
hard copy of Draft 3 is super valuable to me. I don't know. Mr. Rivera, do you know if there are extra print copies of Draft 3 that the new commissioners could have? Could you ask around?
I'll certainly look.
Okay, thank you.
All right, commissioners. Any other thoughts? Okay, so we have a plan that
I
we
guess
don't
I
have
don't
a
know.
plan.
Is the plan work? My mind's not settled on this, but I don't know. We want to come up with working groups, and people are going to work on issues.
Come up with working groups and send me the suggestions. If not, I'm going to come up with some and post them on the agenda for June 11.
Okay.
Send the working group and any other ideas to Andrew, and then he can circulate. And then I'll come up with some sort of a plan that we can take some action on.
Okay. Sounds good.
I was just going to say, as a newbie, I'm just going to thank the commissioners and staff for catching us up to it. And commissioners who make an extra effort, I'll buy you coffee and a cookie.
Oh.
Coffee and a cookie. All right, coffee and a cookie.
Maybe that'd be dinner.
Okay.
Fine, I'll do dinner.
Okay. Future agenda items?